Hello everyone, long time no see. If you have noticed, I took a few months off of filming any podcast episodes and uploading here, and I also took a little bit of a break on my Instagram, but I'm happy to announce that the reason why I took a few months off is because we are expecting. We are having a baby boy due in April of next year, and we're so excited. And that is why I haven't been able to film or really have the desire to film, because if any of you have been pregnant before, you know that the first trimester is pretty miserable. And for me, it was a little rough. It wasn't terrible by any means, but I was definitely down for the count for about 3 months there and was basically living on our couch. And I did a little bit of knitting right at the beginning when my symptoms weren't too bad, but when my symptoms were ramping up, I really did not have any energy whatsoever to be knitting, let alone sitting down to film a video. So that is why I've taken such a long break, but since then, now that I am fully in the middle of my second trimester, I've been feeling a lot better. I was able to finish up some projects that I had on the needles, as well as cast on some new projects, so I'm excited to go through all of those with you today. This video is going to be pretty long, I think, longer than my usual episodes, just because I have 3 completed projects to show you, and as well as some things that I'm working on. And I want to talk about my test knitting experience as well, because I kind of teased that maybe in my last podcast episode, but then kind of like never talked about it again, because it essentially happened all during the beginning of my first trimester, and then I was able to thankfully finish it before my symptoms got too bad. But yeah, if you follow me on Instagram, I posted about it. It's the all fall sweater, and I was kind of posting some of my projects here and there because it's a lot easier for me to just take a few photos, post them on Instagram, than do a whole video. So like I said, on Instagram, you may have been following me and had no idea, but yeah, that's kind of what's been going on. So let's just get into my finished objects. The first piece is, like I said, the all fall sweater designed by Casual Knit Studios, or Natalia, I think that's how you say her name. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my test knitting experience and just kind of how it was like for me for this specific test knit. And then I'll go into the actual construction of the sweater and any modifications I did and things like that. So as usual, I will have chapters down below, so if you're not really interested in hearing about the test knit, you can just kind of skip forward to the next chapter. But yeah, this is the finished piece. I will put photos of what it looked like on me, and I was actually pregnant in that photo. I think I was about 1 month in, so no bump or anything, but it's funny now looking back on those photos, because when I took that photo, I sent it to my husband and I was like, does it look like I'm pregnant? And he was like, no, you're delusional. And I was like, okay, because in my head I was thinking I looked pregnant, and now it's like, you know, I have a full bump and everything. And it's just funny to look back on that. You just really want a bump so early on in your pregnancy because you kind of want proof that there's like a baby in there, and you cannot tell at all that I'm pregnant. Anyways, so yeah, like I said, I was chosen for this test knit. How I came across it was I had followed Casual Knit Studios, I don't even know when, like a long time ago, because when I first made my knitting Instagram, I just went through a bunch of YouTubers that I liked and went through who they followed and then who they followed, and I kind of just went from there because I wanted to follow a bunch of people for inspiration, and I followed a lot of pattern designers and things like that. And so she just happened to be one of the people that I followed, and I saw that she put a photo of her finished all fall sweater on her Instagram, and this was probably mid to late summer, I think, and she basically teased that the pattern would be coming in the fall. And I don't think she had talked about the test knit in that first post, but I remember seeing it on her and really, really liking the design and being really drawn to this shoulder detailing especially. And I thought this would be like a really cool sweater for me to try out. So I think I either bookmarked it or just bookmarked it in my head that, oh, when she drops it, I'm definitely going to purchase it and knit it. And then I think a few days later, she dropped a post that was requesting a call for test knitters, and I thought that was the perfect opportunity for me to get my hands on the pattern a little early. I had never done a test knit before, so I was also kind of interested in that experience because some of the YouTubers I watch here have talked about test knitting, and some of them do a lot of test knits and really enjoy that process. So I wanted to try it out. So I thought, why not? I will shoot my shot. I filled out the form and I was chosen for the test knit. It was really, really exciting actually. And yeah, so I think she announced the test knitters maybe a few days towards the end of August, and then we had our platform on Instagram, so every test knitter had to have a public knitting focused Instagram, which makes sense. I think a lot of pattern makers ask for that because you want to drum up excitement for your pattern. You want to be able to like repost when your test knitters are working on your pattern and have a hashtag and all that. So that's, I feel like, a pretty routine requirement for a lot of pattern makers, especially on Instagram. So just for you to note, if you wanted to test knit, that could be a potential requirement, is to have a public facing knitting Instagram, which I did. So the group of us were in an Instagram group chat. There were maybe about 25 to 30 of us, all ranging different sizes, because when you fill out the form, you kind of put what size you're interested in knitting and what level of knitter you are and experience and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a great group of women. It was a pretty active group chat. Everyone kind of like introduced themselves, where they were from. And then basically the test knit had a start date and a finish date. I believe the start date was August 30th. The official start date, and then we kind of went from there, and she would give us parts of the pattern as we went. So that way it's not like, I mean, there were definitely some knitters who are a lot faster than others, because there are some sections where it's just like, okay, knit to this length, and I could see some people finishing that in like 2 days, and I was like, I don't know how you're knitting this fast, because I feel like I'm like a in-between knitter. Like, I'm not super slow, but I'm not super fast, because I still knit English. I don't knit continental, but I feel like I'm a pretty quick knitter, and I was just baffled and amazed at how quick some of these women were knitting. But yeah, so she would kind of publish the pattern for us section by section, so we could kind of all work together on similar sections and troubleshoot together. And yeah, so at the beginning, she did ask for us to do a gauge swatch with our chosen yarn. She didn't require that we use the same yarn that she did. The requirement is obviously just you want to make sure you hit gauge or hit close enough with whatever yarn you're purchasing. I was able to get my yarn from my local yarn shop, Mother Knitter, who's like a Sandisgarn reseller. So I knit mine in Sandisgarn Double Sunday in the shade Taupe, I think it's called. I'll put kind of more, I think there's more specifics in my Instagram, because I posted that like right on the publishing date, which is when we were supposed to. So my memory is like a little hazy now because it's been like 4 months. But yeah, it's this beautiful gray taupe color. And I tried to pick a color that was kind of similar to the one that she had in her initial photo, which was like this warm beige color. And I would have done like a warmer beige color too, but I have a lot of sweaters in that kind of color in my collection already. So I thought I would pick up a slightly different tone gray, which I still think looks really good with the knitting and the stitch definition and all that. I think I really like this color and how it came out. And Sandisgarn Double Sunday is like super, super soft. It's like a beautiful merino wool, and it was a dream to knit with. It was great. So I was 8 gauge swatched. I was able to hit gauge with, I want to say 4mm needles. And yeah, I knit the smallest size, which is extra small to small. I was able to hit all of the measurements that are listed in the pattern. So if you're purchasing the pattern and you want to knit with Double Sunday, I still would recommend a gauge swatch, but you know, for me, that ended up hitting gauge and making the correct size garment according to all of her measurements, which was great. So yeah, so let's just get into the actual construction and any modifications that I made. One really cool part about this pattern is that it can be knit flat and then seam together, or in the round. And even when you are knitting in the round, there are parts that you knit flat, but for the most part, you're knitting in the round, if that makes sense, versus I believe if you're knitting it completely flat, then you probably do like the front and then the back, and then you seam it together. And in our group of test knitters, I would say the breakdown was almost 50-50 it seemed to me of folks who liked to knit flat versus in the round. I think that's so funny because for me, you could not pay me to knit flat if I don't have to, you know, like I'm very much like, I like to just do stockinette all the way through. I really don't like to knit front and back, like knit flat unless I have to or the pattern calls for it. So I just thought that was interesting that a lot of the women in the test knit group actually prefer to knit flat. And I believe Natalia herself had said too that she prefers to knit flat. So I just thought that was interesting. But the sweater is actually constructed from the bottom up, which I had never done before. So you cast on all your stitches, you do the ribbing, and then you knit to a certain length, and then you split for the front and back. So the front and back are knit separately. And then the way you seam them together is actually at the shoulder. And that's how you seam the front and back together on the needles itself. And I don't quite know what the technique is called. It looks like a saddle shoulder when you wear it, but I don't think that's technically what the construction is called. Maybe it is, but essentially you kind of like knit this length of the panel, and then every time you get to one end, you know, knit front back, and then you kind of join the two parts together. And that is what creates this really cool kind of seam. And I think a little bit of German short row is worked into here as well. But yeah, I just think it creates this really cool line that I've never really seen in another pattern. So I thought that was a really cool part to do, and something that I've never done before in a garment. So that was really fun. And then another cool construction thing that I had never done before is for the neckline. She has you do a crochet chain across the entire neckline, and then you pick up stitches in the crochet chain to then do your ribbing on the neck. And what it does is it just creates this really neat line here. And by neat, I mean cool, but also neat as in like the work looks very neat. If you can see. And I really enjoyed doing that. And yes, it's like a semi extra step because you have to crochet, and you technically do need to know how to crochet a chain, which thankfully I did. So that could, I mean, you don't have to do that technically. Like if you don't know how to crochet or decide not to do that, you could just pick up from the neckline. But of course I wanted to follow the pattern and did it, and I really enjoyed it. And I think I might incorporate that into some of my other pieces in the future, because I do like how neat that pickup line shows up. And again, it's just like a little added detail when you look at the piece up close that I think adds to the design. Otherwise, the ribbing is 1x1 ribbing, I believe, on the sleeves, the body, and the neck. The sleeves, you do work a few decreases in, as you can see, so it kind of like does create more of like a tapered sleeve like usual, which I really like. You do an Italian bind off, so it's similar to a lot of petite knit. I think most of her designs do like 2 rounds of double knitting and then an Italian bind off, so that's what I did for these as well. And yeah, it was really great. So usually when I knit garment pieces, I do tailor the length because I'm very petite, I'm 5 feet tall, and I have a shorter torso as well. So for almost any design, I am shortening the body length almost by like 5 centimeters to up to like 8 centimeters sometimes, depending on the pattern and how oversized it is. But with this one, she actually does recommend to not shorten it too much because she made it so that it's not like a super long sweater, which I appreciate as someone who's more petite. And so I don't actually think I shortened any of the length. Basically where you would do that is just when you're knitting to a certain length before you split, that's where you would shorten it. And I think I was like a little nervous because I'd never knitted something bottom up before, so I was worried that if I did too many mods, like it would just mess it up. So for me, I ended up kind of basically following the allotted measurements that she had going along. And I do think the final piece came out almost exactly how I would want it to fit regardless, which is great. So that's something to note. If you have like an extra long torso, then I would maybe keep that in mind and extend a few rows. But if you are shorter or have just like a proportionately shorter torso like I am, this sweater is not meant to be super long or oversized. So I do think you can get away with just following the pattern and you'll get like a very nicely fitted sweater. It definitely won't be cropped, but it will not fit like, you know, like petite sweater, like petite knit sweaters tend to be very oversized. It's not gonna fit like that. I think it's gonna fit more true to size, which is great. Other notes about this pattern, I mean, they were really clearly written, even with us seeing kind of like a closer to first draft version of the pattern. I didn't really find it to be all that confusing. There were like some wording parts where I made suggestions to change because it was like maybe a little confusing to read. But if you just pay attention and stuff, like I don't think it was that confusing of a pattern whatsoever. I personally made a mistake when I split for the front and back. I somehow just did not split the stitches evenly because you're supposed to split them evenly between front and back, and I did not. And I almost had a flash panic where I was like, am I gonna have to frog this entire piece? And I did not have to. Thankfully, I Googled like how to frog, but like make sure you keep your loops and everything. And so I made sure to do that. And I don't think you can tell where I frogged it at all in the finished piece. So I'm very happy with that, because that was like a moment where I was like, I cannot redo this. Like I would just, I don't know, I would just quit. But I was able to fix it, thankfully. But yeah, so that's kind of all about the construction and the modifications. I highly recommend this pattern. You know, obviously I'm a little biased because I did test knit it and stuff. But again, like I said, I had my eye on this pattern before she even called for test knits, and I'm so happy that I did it. And I would totally, you know, test knit another garment at another point. But it was a very, very positive first test knit experience, and this is definitely one of my favorite sweaters in my collection, period, like whether it's something I knitted or something I purchased. So love this sweater so much. Moving on to my second finished object, this is the seal slipover. I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. I think it's Spanish or French, by Petite Knit, and this I knit in the smallest size, which is extra small. And even in the smallest size, this is a pretty oversized piece. So you'll be able to see photos of it on me, but it's still pretty oversized. I really wish she had this pattern in an extra, extra small, because I would have liked for this to fit just a little tighter so that I could really wear it as like a true slip over. But I feel like because it's kind of big, it just looks more like a sweater vest, like something you need to wear over something. But regardless, I'm glad I ended up knitting this. It was like a cute little pattern, and I think the green really pops with the pearl, like the knit pearl pattern on it. So the yarn that I used for this may look familiar because I had initially casted on another Monday sweater with this yarn. This was the yarn that I purchased while we were in Switzerland. It was the Mayak yarn, I think it's like Foco de Cashmere. And it was on sale in this yarn shop, and she only had 6 balls, I believe, which when I did my calculations, I was like, I think it's like just about right for a Monday sweater. But for some reason, as I was creating the yoke for the Monday sweater, it just really didn't seem like I was gonna have enough yarn. And so I was basically in a dilemma of like, okay, do I knit the entire body, and then if I run out of yarn, I'll just either make it a tank top or make it short sleeves, or do I frog it and, you know, make something else out of it? So I kind of just let it sit on my needles for a few months, honestly, while I worked on like other projects. And then eventually one day I just decided to frog it, and I've been wanting to make another slipover or vest type garment for a while anyways. So I found this pattern on Petite Knit. I thought it was really cute, and I thought the green would really make the pattern pop, which I really think it does. I think I'm a little washed out because I'm right in front of a window, but I think in person it looks really, really good with this green. And I am happy that I ultimately frogged it and decided to knit something else, because I didn't really need like a t-shirt sweater in this material, but I think it's really nice in like this vest form. So that is what I ended up doing. I have about like a ball and a half, like almost 2 balls left of this yarn. So it's probably enough to make a beanie, which I might make, or it might be enough to make like a little scarf or something. So I definitely have enough to like make another accessory, which is nice. And yeah, like I said, I made it the smallest size. This pattern is completely charted. There's some written instructions at the beginning and stuff, but for the most part, it's charted because the pattern goes, you know, all the way through the piece. It is constructed very similarly to a lot of petite knit pieces, which is you knit the back panel first, and then you cast on the shoulders at the back here. You can see that that's where you pick up stitches and knit the shoulders, and then you knit the front piece, and then you join, and then you knit the rest in the round, and then you finish. This one has 2x2 ribbing on all of the ends, this is actually the first piece I think I've ever done 2x2 ribbing. So technically like a new technique, even though it's like not really, but that was kind of fun. And funnily enough, I actually did the increases completely wrong on the back panel, but you actually can't really tell. It's basically, you might be able to see this one line of like stitches that go all the way down. It's meant to kind of just look like that, but I guess because I did it's basically instead of a make one left, I did a right, and then same on the other side. And I freaked out thinking it would be like, look really wrong, but it actually doesn't. It looks totally fine. Like I don't think anyone would notice if I didn't point it out. Pattern wise, the chart, I have to say, was a little confusing. This is the second time I've worked with the chart, so I'm technically not a novice, but I will say she really relies on you to do a lot of the chart work for yourself, because you know, the chart obviously grows because you're making increases, and then at a certain point the chart kind of just has to stop because there's no way you can chart like the entire thing. And then in the instructions, it's just to knit according to pattern, which I think is very common in a lot of charted pieces, because there's just no way, again, you can chart the entire piece because then your chart would just be like super long. So I understand that that's like a pretty standard limitation, but I would think if you have never done charted work ever before, this piece might be a little confusing unless you're willing to really challenge yourself. Like I definitely had points where I was like, what do I need to do here? Do I need to purl here? Do I need to knit here? And really kind of had to think about it, if that makes sense. So it wasn't like a super mindless project, but for me, I wanted something that was like a little more like, not intellectual, just like something that would like, I would have to like think about a little more. And I do think the nice part about this is that there are parts of the chart that are very easy. So the pyramid part is the hardest because you have to kind of like count the correct number of stitches and make sure you're purling on the exact ones that it looks like triangles, or else you know it's all gonna look mismatched. But the bottom row here is just purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, bumps all the way through, and then you alternate. So when you get to those sections, it's very mindless and you can just obviously follow the pattern and do it yourself and not have to be charting the entire time. So I do think it was a good mix of having to really reference a chart and think about where you're knitting, and then you kind of like get to the next section where it's just mindless knitting. So similar kind of to the Ingrid sweater that I knit, there are sections that are just easier to knit and you can kind of look forward to, and then sections that are a little harder too, but that also like challenge you to kind of like think a little bit more. So yeah, so overall I did enjoy knitting this. I don't know if I'll knit it again. I'll probably just pick like a different pattern from Petite Knit. She has like a ton of different slipovers that I had my eye on, but I am glad that I knit this. And again, I do think the green turned out really pretty on this, and it creates this like very drapey fabric. This cashmere is so soft. This definitely makes me want to knit another cashmere item. And I think I will use the rest of this to knit a beanie because it's just so soft. I feel like this would feel so good as a beanie. And yeah, I finished this, I want to say right at the beginning of when I was feeling miserable in my first trimester. So unfortunately, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to wear it out because I was bedridden for 3 months essentially. So I'm definitely excited to wear this for the upcoming like spring season. I think this is like the green again, it's like a very nice spring color. And this garment is big enough that it fits over like a long sleeve or a white shirt, which I'll put 2 different photos that I took of this like on its own versus like over something. So I'm glad it's versatile enough to kind of wear both ways. But again, if it were up to me, I wish this was maybe just like a little smaller. And I think I hit gauge with this, so this is like how it's meant to be. So, you know, it is what it is. Like her pattern is just gonna be oversized, and that's okay. But yeah, so that is my Sil slipover. My last completed object is another Lulu Slipover Junior, and I hope you can tell this is obviously too tiny for me, but this is actually a Christmas gift for my other niece. So if you followed me on this channel before, I think one of the first few podcasts I mentioned I was going to knit 2 of these for my 2 nieces. So I knit one pink one for my one niece. They got to go pick out the yarn, so this was kind of yarn that they picked out. My one niece is obsessed with the color pink, and my other niece, she's turning 3 in February, so she didn't necessarily like pick out this color. I kind of had her mom pick out what color she thought would look cute, but this is like a beautiful electric blue. This is Sanascarn Perfect in the Jolly Blue color, and it's truly like a very jolly blue. This is like such a pretty blue color. I think it's very similar to the Poppy Tee by Petite Knit in this color, and I'm not sure if this is the right gauge for that t-shirt, but it's making me want to knit that t-shirt in this color because I just love this color so much. It looks so good, even on screen, like it's really picking up the vibrancy, and it's beautiful. And this one is in the smallest size. It's 1 to 2. I did hit gauge lengthwise and gauge-wise, but for some reason, the measurement that Petite Knit has for the bust circumference is much larger than where the bust would actually be. So the bust, if you measure from here, from the button bands, that matches the Petite Knit bust size, but if you're measuring from like where her bust would actually be, it's like not the right size. But this looks like the correct size that would fit my niece. So I'm not quite sure if Petite Knit is just measuring the bust from like the bottom here, because technically this like falls where your armpit would fall, like, because it's meant to be like a very open arm, you know what I mean? So technically your bust would be closer to here, but again, that's not the correct measurement. So I'm not quite sure how, I mean, that has to be the case because again, I hit gauge. So it would make sense that you would hit every other gauge if you're hitting gauge, you know what I mean? I'm not worried because I think this will fit her. I mean, just visually, I can tell this will fit her fine. So it's not a big deal, but I just wanted to make a note of that in case you knit your finished piece and you're like, wait, what? Like that doesn't match at all. So I don't know, if someone can illuminate me in the comments, that would be great. But yeah, this is exactly the same as the pink Lulu slipover that I made, so I'm not going to talk about it too much because I have talked about that pattern before. I will link the video where I talk about that more in depth. But this is now my 3rd time knitting this pattern, so I'm very familiar with it. It's knit completely flat because these 2 sections are essentially connected by buttons. And I will unbutton it just so you can kind of visualize what it looks like. And these buttons I just picked up at my local Michael's. And what's cool about this pattern is like there's a lot of room for customization with the embellishments. Like you can do different color buttons or different textures or even different shapes. You could even add some embroidery. It's like a very nice basic pattern that you can kind of then, you know, zhuzh up however you wish. So it's knit kind of like this. So you start with the back panel and you knit with increases, and then you kind of knit all the way down the back panel, and then you pick up at the shoulders. Again, that's a very typical, I think, Petite Knit style. You pick up and then you knit the front panel, do all the ribbing, and then you do all of the ribbing on the sides from armpit to armpit like that. And then what I usually do is then I actually do the neckline finishing first, and then I leave the button bands for last because I honestly don't love double knitting. Like I think it's like very tedious and hard to knit. So I always leave the button bands for last, and the button bands are knit in double knitting. And then on this side, you obviously knit buttonholes. And yeah, this is like a very clear pattern. Even when I knit it the first time, I had never done button bands before. I had never done like buttonholes before, and I was like a little intimidated. So hence why the first one that I knit was for myself so that I could just like work out any kinks just in case it was like complicated. But honestly, I found it to be very clear. Petite Knit has great videos on her website, and I mean, I think they're on YouTube, but of people, I don't think it's her actually. I think it's like some other knitter that just like works for her maybe, but I don't think that's like Petite Knit herself doing this, but with very clear instructions on how to do everything. So even if you were reading it and not sure like quite how to do it, you could just reference the video. And that's what I did for the button bands, and it was like very clear. And I was able to do them the first time pretty much with no, like, you know, like no help, I guess. The only thing I will say that I modified for this pattern specifically is I decided to do a, what do you call, like just a regular bind off instead of a tubular bind off, because frankly, I just get so annoyed with doing the Italian bind off or the tubular bind off because it takes so long, and I don't think it looks neater than doing a regular bind off knit purl. Like maybe just the way I'm doing Italian bind offs are wrong, but I just don't think it looks different. So for all of the ribbing, I actually did do 2 rounds of double knitting still, and then just did a regular bind off, which I think if anything looks neater. Like this is, let me see, because I did the back with a tubular. And then I did the front, I think, with tubular as well, but the sides I did with the regular bind off. And can you tell the difference? I can't tell the difference, okay? So to me, it's like if I can't visually tell a difference, then I'm just gonna do the easier one, because why not? And I think elasticity wise, like I know some people when they do a regular bind off, it tends to be quite tight, but I don't think mine is that tight. So I don't know. Like I do know that the tubular is nice because it's more elastic, but again, I just don't think it mattered that much on the side. So I don't know. That's a modification you can make, I think, based on your preference, but that is technically a mod that I made to the pattern. And otherwise, yeah, I'm so pleased with it. I think it looks really cute. Again, I love this blue color. I can't wait to give these to them at Christmas and see them wearing their matching little vest. I think it's going to be so cute. So very excited for to be finished with this sweater. Alrighty, now let's get into some projects that I have on the needles. I currently have 2 that I'm actively working on. One that I have put aside that I'll still show you all because I technically have it on the needles, but I'm pretty sure I'm gonna frog it and not finish it, unfortunately, but that's okay. That's just what happens. But the first one that I have is the Melange Sweater Man. I don't know if she makes a Melange sweater women's. I mean, she usually does both. So yeah, but in my memory, I can't remember. She makes one for women, but this is a sweater for my husband. This is how far I am right now. I'm basically in the round on the body. You can see that's about how much I have in the round. I am knitting the men's size large. And this is a beast of a project, I have to say. Obviously, up till now, I've only knitted pieces for myself or for my nieces who are smaller than me, or accessories, which are much smaller than me, you know what I mean? And this is the first piece that I'm knitting for my husband. And yeah, pray for me. He's a big boy, okay? Like he is 5'11", he's tall, you know, he wears usually like a sweater size large. So when I finally decided to knit him a piece, I had him look through her website and just see which pieces spoke to him, and he liked the look of this Melange sweater. And yeah, I'm very excited to be knitting something for him. Obviously, I love him. I want to knit him something beautiful, but it is truly trying my patience, because even knitting pieces for myself, you know, when you're knitting in the round, it can feel endless sometimes, and it's like never ending, which is like nice, and it's like a positive and a con, right? For this one, because it's so big and I'm not used to knitting pieces this big, it's like, it feels like I'm knitting for hours and then I get like 2 centimeters of length. So that being said, I am really liking how this is looking. This is my first time knitting with 2 threads like threaded together, and to create this kind of melange, and I'll show you the yarn that I'm using in a second. But I do think it looks really cute, actually. So that's like the one thing keeping me going, is like seeing the progress I've made so far and how good it looks. And I think it will really look good on him as well. And it's gonna be a warm sweater. So obviously we are now already at the end of November, and I think had I not gotten pregnant and been miserable, I would probably be much further along, but I really did not knit this at all in my first trimester. And now just have been like really trying to marathon work this. So what I've done to kind of motivate myself is actually every day when I start knitting, I actually tie this little string here to a row that I started on. And then at the end of the day, I like to see how much progress I've made. So that to me in my head is like motivating me to knit, because I have kind of like a goal to, you know, knit as far as I can basically. But yeah, I will talk about more about the construction and overall stuff like that once it's done, but I did want to show you all what it looked like. And as for the yarn that I'm using, again, I use a lot of Sandnesgarn yarn just because my local yarn shop mainly carries Sandnesgarn, and they do have like a ton of different products, so I think it's just the easiest for me usually to purchase. But I'm using the two Thun Peer Gynt yarns. I heard that it's pronounced Thun because that's like how you pronounce it in like Swedish, I guess. Is it Swedish? But yeah, so it's basically the Peer Gynt, but the thin version. So Sandnesgarn makes a lot of lines where it's like Peer Gynt and then they make a thin version, just like their Line or lean line, they make a Thun lean and then like a thick lean. So it's kind of cool that they have like, it's technically the same fabric, but just like different weights. And so this is about, let's see, it's 27 stitches per 10 centimeters square, and the recommended needle size is 3mm needles. I'm using it held together, which is what she recommends in the pattern. I think she also uses Thun Peer Gynt for one of the variations that she knit. So I'm basically just knitting it exactly as she is. And I did not gauge swatch, mainly because like this is exactly the yarn that she uses and the needles that she uses. But also I'm not too worried about it being bigger. Just cause like, you know, if it's bigger, it'll just fit him oversized, and I don't think it'll be too small. So yeah, to be fair, I didn't gauge swatch, but that's okay. And the two colors I used, they don't have like, I hate how they don't have the actual color names on the rolls, but they have the color names online. So I can only tell you the color code, but this light kind of white beige color is 2321. And this darker kind of cool tone brown is 2652. So those are the two colors that I decided to use held together, and I think they really complement each other and look really cool. It's again very similar to one of the colorways she has directly on her website. I'll put in a picture if I can find it, but it's just called the Melange Sweater Man, and she has a ton of variations. Like I think she makes one that's more of like a red and white, and then she has like a green and white. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to the coloring of this because it's two yarns held together. I mean, you could even make it one color and just hold these two together, or I think you can just knit it with the regular Peer Gynt, and that should be the same gauge as two held together. Don't quote me on that, but I think that might be the case. So that's the yarn that I'm using for this project. This next project I'm really excited about because this is a little beanie that I am knitting for our baby. We are having a boy, and I'm really excited. This is the Musselburgh hat. And I know it's super, super popular on Ravelry. Apparently it's like the most popular hat or the most made hat with the most projects on Ravelry. And apparently when it came out, it really took the knitting world by storm, kind of how like the Sophie scarf did. But I had no idea because I wasn't really interested in knitting accessories when I first started knitting. But more recently, I've been getting more into accessory knitting because I like to gift them as gifts. And I don't know, I just kind of got into them in that way. And I watched a Knits video, Amy here on YouTube. She did like a holiday gift guide and recommended the Musselburgh hat as like a nice project as a gift. And the pattern just really looked interesting to me, and I like a lot of stuff that she knits, so I figured that would be a fun thing to try. And I think the cool thing about this pattern is that it is a gaugeless pattern, so pretty much from light fingering or fingering weight to DK weight yarn, you can knit this, and all you have to do is basically start the hat, and at a certain point she has you measure the gauge, and then based on what gauge you have, then you follow the pattern. So you can't really knit it with like an Aran weight yarn because then it would just be super, super, super bulky. I mean, you could, but I guess it just wouldn't really look as good. But the way it's meant to look eventually is a giant oval. So this is like the top, and then you knit to a certain length, and then you knit it closed again, and then you tuck it in so that it creates two layers of fingering weight, and then you can fold up the brim as well. So when it's folded up, it's technically like 4 layers of fingering weight yarn if that's what you're using. So you can imagine if you're using like a very thick yarn, it's just gonna be like a giant bubble around your head. But if that's the look you want, then go for it. So at the top, you can see you cast on a disappearing loop cast on, and then you do increases kind of around like this. And the only kind of like finicky part about this pattern, I would say, is that you start it with DPNs or magic loop. And then depending on the size you're making, if you're making the baby to toddler size, I think you kind of have to go with magic loop or DPNs the whole way. But if you're making the adult size, you can eventually switch to 16-inch circulars and knit in the round. So obviously you can see I'm still using magic loop, so I am making the baby size. But the baby size, I will say, is still pretty big. Like this borderline looks like it could fit me. Like, isn't that crazy? And obviously like a much bigger head. I am hitting the right gauge and right measurements. So I think it's just in the pattern when she says baby, it's like you can really, I mean, it's probably still too big for like a newborn. I think maybe like a 6-month-old baby. But she also has a toddler size, and then adult small to adult extra large, maybe 2XL. And yeah, so obviously I'm knitting the baby size, and I think it's turning out really well. I'm really loving this fabric that this yarn is creating. And this yarn is actually the yarn that I was gifted in that giveaway that I think was in my last podcast video. So I will link that up below as well if you want to check that out of me like unboxing it. But it's from Farmer's Daughter Fibers. I think that's what it's called. I apologize, I already threw out the label. Like I junk journal, so I already put it in my journal, so I don't have the label right in front of me, but I talk about it in that video. But it's their sock yarn, so it's a pretty standard sock yarn. It's like merino, wool, and nylon mix. And it's this beautiful blue teal kind of color. I believe they're hand dyed, so there is quite a lot of variation. And they do recommend that if you are knitting a garment that you, what do you call it? Like you switch the balls out, I guess, like so make sure so that it doesn't have striping. I'm not quite sure how that works. I can't remember what the exact term is, but if you're creating just like one project, it probably doesn't matter if you don't care that there's kind of like this striping effect. But I think there's a way to like mitigate that if you were to be knitting a garment in some way. But yeah, this is definitely the thinnest yarn I've ever knit with. I'm knitting this on 2.5 millimeter needles. But I have to say, like, as much as I hate knitting with really thin yarn, because again, it's like not as satisfying because it feels like you knit forever, the fabric that this is creating is everything. Like, I just love the way this fabric is turning out. And now I'm sounding crazy because now this is literally making me want to do summer knits again and knit something like a garment in this, because I think that would look so freaking good. But again, like even just knitting this hat is like taking forever. So if I were to try to knit a garment for myself, like I just don't know, but it's definitely making me want to do summer knits. But yeah, I'm gonna start with this hat first and see how I feel when I finish it. But again, the cool thing about this pattern is that I believe it takes, I mean, depending on the size you're making, I think you can get away with under 100 grams of knitting. And usually that's basically like a ball. Like this is a 100-gram ball. So I have more than enough to make a baby hat. I think actually, I think it's about like the size of a baby hat. So maybe the adult size does use more, but I don't know. I don't think so, because I remember Ninit saying that I think even for the adult size, you can get away with one ball. So maybe there's like more that I'll have left over from the baby hat. But regardless, I wanted to make the baby hat version first anyways, just because I think this blue obviously would look really cute on him, but also it's just a smaller project for me to do once through. And if I really enjoy it, then I'll probably make one for myself and then for my husband and for family members and stuff like that. But you can find a lot of videos online of folks who have done a lot of different variations of this hat who can give you really good tips. And that's kind of what I did. There's this one woman who's done like 15 of these, and she tells you like the best yarn weight that she's found or the best type of yarn that lays the best and things like that. So if you want guidance on that, there's like a lot of resources online for you to look at. But yeah, I'm very excited to share with you what the final product will look like. But so far I'm really enjoying it. And this is actually making me want to cast on another one and work on it simultaneously. So we'll see if that ends up happening. Alrighty, now this last project that is on my needles is technically one that I started earlier. This is actually a baby blanket, so it is very cute and precious and does mean a lot to me because it obviously was meant to be for our baby, but it is knit completely flat. You already know how I feel about that. And this yarn is truly like, it's funny because before I started knitting with wool yarns, I had knit a few pieces with like acrylic yarn, and I had knit a few pieces with a more cotton blend yarn and didn't really think anything of it. And then now that I've knitted with wool yarns, I'm like, what is this? I'm like, what is this peasant yarn I'm knitting with? I'm like, it's like feels completely different. It's not nearly as satisfying of a knitting experience. And yeah, it's just kind of unfortunate, but I do think I'm gonna frog this, but then I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do with all the yarn because I had purchased all the yarn for the quantity of a blanket, but it's just like the experience of knitting this has just not been great. So I just never want to pick it up. It's tough because I do think like a cotton blend for a baby blanket is obviously going to be more sturdy. It's easy to wash. It's just going to be, it's just going to be like a better material overall to have for a baby blanket. But I'll put a picture of what the blanket is supposed to look like. Thankfully, it was a free pattern, so it's like not like I spent money on the pattern. But again, I did buy all of the yarn that I needed for it. So I don't know. I might end up maybe frogging it and then doing a crochet blanket instead because crochet is a lot quicker and I can crochet pretty quickly. And I've crocheted a few blankets in kind of like a cottony material for my nieces, and they've held up really well in the wash through throw up and like, you know, running around the house in, and they still really love those blankets and they look to be in really good condition still, and I know they've been washed. So that's giving me some encouragement to maybe still do a baby blanket, but I think I'll just crochet it. I don't know. I just really wanted to knit one, but again, this is like really trying my patience, and it does look really cute. It's meant to look like toy blocks. But I don't know, y'all. I think if I do decide to knit a blanket, I might actually pick up like a nice light kind of thin cashmere yarn and knit it in a giant tube so that it's like completely in the round. It's just stockinette all the way through. And then if I'm worried about them like with the holes and stuff, like maybe I'll just like then seam the tops and bottoms together. So technically it's all closed off, but it's like a double layer cashmere blanket. That's like the only way I feel like honestly I could knit an entire blanket is if it's just all stockinette like that, because then it's truly mindless. I can just like knit it on the couch and it's just gonna be easier than like following a pattern like this. So I will do some research later today to see if there's something like that. But if you have a blanket knitting pattern that you like that's like that, that's kind of what I'm describing. That's essentially like a tube scarf but just wider, so it's a blanket. I mean, I guess I don't even need a pattern for that. I could just find a pattern for a scarf and cast on like double the amount and then just, you know, do it myself. But anyways, you know what I mean. If you have a pattern that you like, please link it down below for me. But yeah, I think I'm gonna frog it, unfortunately, even though I do like the way it's turning out. The knitting is just, the cotton is just not it. I just can't. Now I'm spoiled with knitting like cashmere and with like merino wool and stuff, and it sounds so pretentious and whatever, but I think you'll understand, like knitters, if you are like me, like it's just not as fun to knit with cotton. Like it doesn't feel the same. It just has like, maybe it's the needles I'm using are too big, but it just feels very like holey. Like I don't know how to explain that. Like, and it just, I don't like how it's not tight versus like, you know, something like this is tight, you know what I mean? So maybe it's just the needle size, but I'm using the recommended needle size and the exact yarn that they use for the project. So this is like what it's meant to look like. It's just not as satisfying to knit. So I'm probably gonna frog it, and I don't know, give me some ideas of what you think I could use, because I have like 10 of these. So it's definitely enough to make a blanket. But again, crochet also eats up yarn a lot quicker than knitting. So I'm afraid that if I do a crochet blanket, it might just turn out tiny. I don't know. So please let me know. I'm in a little bit of a dilemma here. All right, lastly, I usually talk about acquisitions, but because I, again, was down for the count for 3 months, I really have not purchased any yarn that has not been used for a project, but I do have a lot of spare yarn just in the past that I've used that I'm kind of now wanting to make into Musselburgh hats. However, because I saw online, like a lot of folks who have done it in a heavier DK weight yarn say that the hat just doesn't look as nice because it's stiffer, it's thicker. You essentially have 4 layers of DK weight yarn going across your head versus fingering weight. So the drawback is that I think it looks bulkier, but I guess the benefit is that it's a lot warmer. So if you're in a cold climate, I actually think the thicker DK weight might be nice. I do live in New Jersey. It gets pretty cold here. So I have enough scrap yarn, DK yarn, that maybe I will just make one anyways. And I bet it'll knit up quick because, you know, DK weight is obviously going to be a lot easier than fingering weight yarn. But I do think I'm going to make a beanie for myself using the rest of my Easy Care yarn. This is the yarn that I made my Cumulus tee out of, and I did knit that on 3mm needles. So yeah, this one says recommended is like, I think 3 to like 3.5mm. So I'll probably knit this on 3mm needles and do a Musselburgh hat in this because it's like a very nice 100% wool. So I think it'll actually still feel really warm. And then I think I'll knit one for myself in this, and then maybe I will try knitting with a DK weight just to see what it looks like and if I like that look, and maybe I'll knit one for my husband as well. But yeah, these hats are, I think, I don't know, maybe it's because like I'm pregnant and I'm still tired. Like just the thought of doing like a full garment is kind of daunting for me right now. So I feel like anything I want to cast on, I want to be able to finish within like a month. And I feel like, you know, a hat I can easily finish within a month with how I'm feeling and still being a little fatigued, but still wanting to knit something. So that is most likely my future plan, is to knit the remaining yarn that I have into another Musselburgh hat for myself. Alrighty, we actually managed to finish this video in under an hour, which is great. I hope you all enjoyed. Again, we are beyond excited to be expecting a baby. I'm not really gonna share much about that like on this channel because I want this to remain very much like my knitting space, but obviously as I'm knitting pieces for the baby, you'll obviously be able to see those and things like that. Follow me on Instagram. That's where I'm posting much more regularly, even with my podcast schedule, which now hopefully will be back to weekly, but we'll just have to see, you know, how exhausted I get in pregnancy. But Instagram is definitely where I'm most active. You know, chat with me there, follow me there. I'm posting much more frequently on there as well. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.